Well, Edna's babysitting for Mrs. Blair, Mrs. Jack Blair, and Jack Blair is the lath mill boss up ahead there, above there, see? And Edna goes, because we know Jack Blair's wife ever since I can remember, you know, and Catherine was, Edna was a kind of a babysitter for her, see, for Mrs. Jack Blair. And he told Edna, you tell Shorty to come up, and because he always called me Shorty. He said, tell Shorty to come and see me. So I went to see him, and he gave me a job up in the lath mill, being a flunky, see? And the flunky's job was to keep the water bucket full of fresh water and carry up the lath string that they tied it into bundles and keep the floor clean. And they started to make some what they call 32-inch laths, see? The others are 48 inches. And they saved, they had thrown them away for years, but they decided to save them and trim them. Lath that wouldn't make 4-foot lath would make 32-inch lath feet. And then he taught me how to grade those laths, and they threw them off into a little bunk on the side. The guy works here, they call it, he's pulling lath that come out of him. And there's the railroad shop right there, the postage building. They had a railroad shop. There's some of the houses on Knob Hill where the upper crust live in.
And I worked as a maid in one of those. And Edna did too. Edna worked as a maid for Dr. Gibson, and I worked as a maid for the O'Connells, who were the big shots in the 40s. I don't know which house. But the company owned them all.
Yeah. They owned everything except the Lutheran church. But the sawmill superintendent, Mark Seymour, invented the chainsaw and patented it. And nobody else could build them for years. They were 16 feet long, the blade was, and they run with a 25 horsepower electric motor.
Wow. Is that what that is?
Well, they had it's a short log mill, see, mostly 16 foot logs. A few longer ones when they had orders for longer stuff, you know. And then they went to logging with donkey engines, high-line logging, and they brought them in you know, in 30 and 40 foot logs, see. And they built an annex on the end there, and they had 2 drag saws in there to cut them long logs into short logs for the short log mill, see. Well, those drag saws were shaking the building to pieces, especially when the 2 of them ran at the same time. So he was dreaming some way to keep from shaking the building apart, and he had the shop over there, the railroad shop, make them chains with it. Every link had 2 cutters and a raker, and the blades were 16 feet long, and each link was that long with 3 cutting teeth on it, 2 cutters and a raker, and that's how they cut those logs. And I saw them work a few times because they quit donkey logging. It was tearing up too much timber. They decided to go back to horse logging and short logs, and so they didn't use them for years. And then while I was an electrician there, they started to haul logs with these big white and Kenworth trucks and bring them in 40-foot logs, you know. And so they put an 8-foot circle saw up there with a 100 horsepower motor on it that cut them.
Wow.
And boy, when that saw came down on that log, it was about a bushel of sawdust just flew out the end.
Not long ago, when we were following a log truck down the freeway, and that kid was just amazed at those logs, and I said, when I was a kid, those size logs that came out of the woods were, you could get 3 logs on a truck.
So many
And I
trucks
said,
would
now-
come in with just one log.
I said, and now you can't even find a tree that big, I don't think.
That little stuff you see on the road on trucks nowadays, they left it in the woods when I was a kid. And this is out in the lumber yard with it. Lumber piler. See how they jack the lumber up there? That's why they call them lumberjacks originally, because they made these air drying piles out in the yard for air drying lumber. They had a bar they stuffed into the thing, and then they put the board on there, and then they pried up on it, and the other end went clear up where this guy could reach it, see? They're all Swedes. They're lumber pilers. That's the green chain. And look, that's a logging camp, see? Those are the bunkhouses sitting on the railroads, on rails. They build them down in Potlatch and take them up in the woods. They had, I think they each had 8 men in them, each one of them. And you could move them from one camp to another, see, on the rails.
And the cook shack?
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's some horse wagons. That all came to an end during the Depression. They never horse logged after the Depression. Very little.
What a crew.
Got cats. That's another camp story. There's a logging camp. That's before they started to have so many on the rails. Yeah, that's a jammer. That's what they call a jammer. That loads the logs on the cars. They slide it along from, they're sitting on that car loading the one next to them, and then they pull themselves off of that car onto the next one and load the car they've just been sitting on. And it's always sitting on an empty flat car, see? Then they bring in another bunch of empties, and it just slides itself from one to the other.
What was it called?
There's the Washington, Idaho, and Montana Railroad. We called it the Wash, Iron, and Men. W-I-N-M. Washington, Idaho, and Montana. Bring it out over the log and coming. I know right where that big curve is. See, they had 2 dams. They had one above the other one, so when the river got low in the winter, in the summertime, they could let water out of the upper dam and keep the lower one up at the same level. See? So they had the upper dam and the lower dam. That's right by the upper swamp. That's where we skated. That's the depot, Potlatch. The passenger train sitting there ready to go. That's the real late picture. That's the diesel that they quit running those steam trains and bought a diesel engine. That's after I left there. They never had that when I lived there.
Just to stop there for
That's the Goose. It was just a passenger thing that ran on the railroad when they took the steam rigs off.
These schools, then people stop there and go to bed.
That's the logger again. There's the lumber yard and the blending mill stack, and there's the Potlatch store. Potlatch Mercantile Company. There's the depot again.
There's the hospital.
I know that guy, but I can't think of his name. That's an old picture. That looks like the coal company that it is. There's one of the Shea engines, you know, little geared locomotives. They went and you could walk as fast as they run. But they were powerful. They had real wide wheels. They could run on rough railroad, very poor railroad tracks. They didn't go too fast. Another log train. You get a train load of logs like that come in every day and get dumped in the pond.
That's quite a sight when those logs they come rolling off those rail cars into the pond.
This is an engine that never was very satisfactory. It didn't have the weight at where it should have been on the wheels. It was a little locomotive, but it was poorly designed. I remember that engine. What is that? It's a wreck.
Yep.
That's the snowplow. Another jammer loading logs. And that's when they highline logs. See, that's in a cable stretch between two trees, and that's a. I never worked in the woods. Picture this. Look at that old truck. That's a picture of the log pond. They kept it from freezing in the winter. They had they had a what do you call it? Kind of a, wouldn't be a dam, but they drove what they call sheet piling, and they made it out of nailing 2x6s together, and one of them stuck. It looked like tongue and groove when they, you know, and then they drove them in there. And they had them about 6 feet apart, and they filled that full of horse manure. This is called the horse manure out there, and that insulated the pond from the river, and the pond, and they heated it from steam from the mill, and kept it from freezing. And on one side of that barrier thing there, that horse manure, it'd be frozen solid, and then on the other side it'd be steaming, 40 below zero, and it'd be hot water out there. See that white pine king, they cut that not too long ago. It was starting to die.
Yeah, it died.
And it ain't too long since they left it standing, you know. They call a white pine king. It was the biggest one.
They left the stump and left the monument.
This picture here, there was hundreds of trees like that, you know. Tall, straight trees without a knot in them.
I came back to this old town 'cause my home is here, to try to find some things I'd left behind. I'd only been away for just a few short years, but I forgot about the pace of modern times. I saw changes all around me, and some were good, but I hardly recognized my side of town. They tore down the swinging casing from the cottonwood. That old tree was all it marked familiar ground. Hey, they're tearing the labor camps down. and I feel a little sentimental shame. Where's the hungry man gonna live at in this town? They're tearing the labor camps down. The Hilltop Family Market had been moved somewhere, and the name was changed to fit the newer home. And the friends that I remember were no longer there, and the cabin that my daddy built was gone. They're tearing the labor camps down. I feel a little sentimental shame. Where's a hungry man gonna live out in this town? They're tearing the labor camps down.
There's a guy here that pushes these boards up so I can get about the right amount in my hand, and I set them on the machine. This goes pretty fast, you know. One load right after another. There's a chain there that takes one board at a time out from under this file, see? And the boards go through and it gets both ends trimmed. Well, there's a fellow on the other end that I get a hold of these boards and he gets a hold of them and we lay them on there. We have to work together, see, coordinate. Well, he has to keep them pushed up against a bumper here, or if it only takes a sliver off of one end and a whole lot of whatever's left off of the other end. If he can't keep them pushed up there, it doesn't cut anything off of the end, and then the board's too short. We have to cut 2 feet off and make another board out of it, see. Waste lumber. Well, I asked my boss, I said, couldn't they have an arm, rig an arm on there, some kind with a spring, that after that board gets out from under the pile, it would push it up against the bumper, and it wouldn't make any difference with it. And I said, we could speed up the machine if we did that. See. We wanted to speed up the machine because we were working by the thousands of feet, board feet, see. Yeah, I think they could, so they did that. Guy wrote it up and got $2.